Below the sunlit waves, the Megalodon was a god, but in the suffocating darkness of the abyss, it was just prey. For millions of years, the oceans belonged to a single, undisputed tyrant. Picture a creature over 50 feet long, a living submarine of pure muscle, cartilage, and malice. Its jaws opened wide enough to swallow a whole carriage, lined with rows upon rows of serrated teeth, each the size of a grown man's hand. When it hunted near the surface, basking in the warm glow of the prehistoric sun, absolutely nothing could stand in its way. It tore through small whales. It crushed the spines of ancient manatees. It was the apex predator of a sunlit world, ruling over the shallow continental shelves with absolute, terrifying authority. But the ocean is deep, very, very deep. As you dive past the sunlit zone, the light begins to fail. The vibrant blues fade into a dull, lifeless gray. At 3,000 feet down, the water turns freezing cold, and the darkness becomes absolute. It is a crushing, suffocating void. And down here, the rules of survival drastically change. Down here, the Megalodon was not the king. It was an intruder. You see, we have all been lied to by the fossil record. We look at the massive teeth of the Megalodon and assume it had no equals. But the shattered, heavily scarred bones scattered across the deep ocean floor tell a very different and chilling story. They speak of shadows moving in the black water. They speak of predators that did not need eyes to see. They speak of highly intelligent, warm-blooded killers that looked at the largest shark in history and saw nothing but a massive, slow-moving mountain of meat. Today, we are going to dive into the pitch-black abyss. We are going to uncover the true monsters of the prehistoric deep. These are the highly evolved creatures that turned the ultimate apex predator into a desperate victim. These are the deep-sea nightmares that could and did eat the Megalodon alive. To understand how a king falls, you must first understand the fatal flaw in its armor. The Megalodon, for all its terrifying size and devastating bite force, was still, fundamentally, a shark. And sharks are bound by the limitations of their ancient biology. They are creatures of instinct, driven by smell, by the vibrations in the water, and most importantly, by sight. In the sun-drenched waters of the shallows, the Megalodon was an unmatched hunter. It could spot the silhouette of a whale against the surface from miles away. But as it plunged into the abyssal zones, chasing deep-diving prey or seeking cooler currents, its primary advantage was completely stripped away. The light vanished. The ocean became a sensory void. Yes, it possessed the ability to detect electrical fields at very close range, but in the vast, empty expanse of the deep ocean, that was like trying to navigate a sprawling, dark forest with a single, dying match. It was, for all intents and purposes, entirely blind. Now, consider the nightmares waiting for it in the dark. While the giant shark drifted through the black water, unable to see past its own massive snout, its enemies were watching it with terrifying clarity. They did not use eyes. They used sound. This is the absolute biological superpower known as echolocation. Imagine the deep ocean not as a blinding void, but as a brilliantly lit, three-dimensional map inside the highly evolved brain of a killer. These prehistoric marine mammals sent out bursts of high-frequency clicks, piercing the dense, freezing water. These sound waves would travel for miles in the dark, strike the massive, lumbering body of the Megalodon, and bounce back. Instantly, the hunters knew everything. They knew the shark's exact size. They knew its speed. They knew its exact trajectory. They could even detect the density of its cartilage frame and the slow, steady rhythm of its heavy heartbeat. The Megalodon had absolutely no idea it was being watched. It lacked the biological hardware to detect or understand the high-frequency sound waves passing right through its own flesh. In the pitch-black arena of the deep sea, the ultimate apex predator was completely exposed. It was nothing more than a massive, glowing target for highly intelligent assassins. Predators who could communicate, scheme, and coordinate a lethal ambush without ever making a sound. The shark could comprehend. The darkness was never a hiding place for the Megalodon. It was an inescapable trap. Meet the true god of the abyss, the Livyatan melville. While the Megalodon was built of soft, yielding cartilage, this monster was an armored dreadnought constructed of dense, indestructible bone. Imagine a modern sperm whale, but instead of a gentle giant diving for tiny squid, It was a hyper-aggressive apex killer designed to rip other leviathans to shreds. It grew over 50 feet long, easily matching the giant shark in sheer mass. But size was far from its most terrifying attribute. Look at the skull of a Livyatan. It is a massive, heavy battering ram, and lining its colossal jaws were teeth. Teeth that make the megalodons look like fragile pieces of broken glass. These were the largest biting teeth of any known animal in the history of the Earth. Over 14 inches long. Thick, heavy ivory spikes built not just for slicing soft flesh, but for completely crushing massive bones into powder. Yet, the absolute horror of the Livyatan lies hidden deep inside its massive, squared-off head. Inside that skull sat a highly complex mammalian brain and a sophisticated biological sonar organ known as the spermaceti organ. Remember the echolocation we discussed? The Livyatan did not just use it to see in the dark, it weaponized it. When a Livyatan locked onto a Megalodon in the freezing abyss, it did not need to immediately rush in. Marine paleontologists suggest these ancient predatory whales could produce bursts of sound of such unimaginable acoustic power that they became physical, concussive weapons. Imagine a sound so incredibly loud, so intensely focused, that it hits your body like a solid wall of concrete moving at highway speeds. In the pitch-black water, the Megalodon would suddenly be struck by a devastating, invisible wave of acoustic energy. The extreme high-frequency blast would violently scramble the shark's lateral line, the delicate sensory organ it relies on to feel its surroundings. The sheer force of the sound could disorient the giant shark, causing severe internal distress and perhaps even temporarily paralyzing its simple nervous system. Blind, deafened, and completely confused, the Megalodon would thrash helplessly in the suffocating dark. It would not even see the massive jaws opening. And then, the Livyatan would strike. It would ram the stunned shark with the kinetic energy of a freight train, sinking those 14-inch ivory spikes deep into the shark's vital organs. One bite, one devastating, crushing crunch in the absolute dark, and the reign of the king was instantly terminated. Now, let us drag a terror from an older world into our abyssal simulation. Imagine a creature so bizarre, so utterly terrifying in its design, that early paleontologists mistakenly believed it was the king of the sea reptiles. But it was no reptile. It was Basilosaurus, a primitive serpentine whale that grew to over 60 feet in length. It prowled the ancient oceans like a mythical sea dragon, its elongated body sliding silently through the water with terrifying grace. If we brought these two titans together in the crushing depths, the Megalodon would face a predator that defied all the rules of conventional combat. The giant shark was built for a straightforward collision, a brutal, head-on strike. But how do you ram a shadow that moves like a snake? The Basilosaurus possessed a jaw structure designed not just for tearing, but for absolute bone-shattering execution. Its bite force was easily enough to crush the thickest skulls of its contemporary prey. But against a creature as massive as the Megalodon, the sea serpent would not need to rely on its bite alone. It would exploit the most pathetic, humiliating biological glitch hidden inside every shark on Earth. A phenomenon known as tonic immobility. In the pitch-black water, the serpent would easily outmaneuver the bulky shark. Gliding completely undetected beneath the beast, the Basilosaurus would strike upward with lightning speed. Its heavy, bone-crushing jaws would clamp down viciously onto the Megalodon's massive pectoral fin. And then, the serpent would use the incredible leverage of its 60-foot-long muscular body to violently roll. With a sickening twist, it would force the giant shark completely upside down. The moment a shark is flipped on its back, a devastating short circuit occurs in its primitive brain. It falls into a state of severe, inescapable paralysis. It cannot swim. It cannot fight back. It cannot even move. And because the Megalodon required constant forward momentum to force oxygen-rich water over its massive gills, the horror truly begins. The Basilosaurus would not even need to expend energy tearing the shark apart. It would simply hold the paralyzed king upside down in the suffocating dark. The mighty Megalodon, the supposed tyrant of the prehistoric oceans, would slowly, agonizingly drown in its own watery kingdom, while a 60-foot serpent waited patiently to consume its remains. But perhaps the most agonizing fate the Megalodon could suffer did not come from a single massive leviathan. It came from the shadows, multiplying, surrounding, and communicating. The ocean was not just home to solitary giants. It birthed intelligent, highly coordinated packs of warm-blooded killers. Meet Acrophyseter, a terrifyingly agile, raptor-like sperm whale, and the brutal ancestors of the modern killer whale. Individually, these ancient dolphins and small whales were a fraction of the megalodon's immense size. A single one would easily be snapped in half by the giant shark, but they never hunted alone. They were the wolves of the prehistoric sea. Imagine the scene. A solitary megalodon cruising through the twilight zone, its primitive brain entirely unaware that it has just crossed into hostile territory. In the dark, a series of rapid, high-frequency clicks begins to echo. Then, another series of clicks answers from the left, then from the right, then from below. The pack is talking. They are using their echolocation not just to find the shark, but to map its every movement and broadcast that data to the entire pod. They are forming a tightening, invisible sphere of death around the oblivious king. The execution is not a sudden, overwhelming blow. It is a calculated, terrifyingly precise psychological and physical dismantling. First, the fastest members of the pod dart in from the shark's blind spots. They strike with razor-sharp teeth, tearing deep chunks of flesh from the megalodon's vulnerable gills and sensitive fins, then vanish back into the pitch-black water before the massive shark can even turn its heavy body to retaliate. The megalodon thrashes violently, snapping its terrifying jaws at the empty darkness. But every time it lunges at a phantom echo, another set of jaws clamps down on its tail from behind. They use their superior mammalian stamina to run the cold-blooded fish into absolute exhaustion. They confuse its primitive senses with a chaotic storm of sonar clicks. They bleed it out through 1,000 calculated, agonizing cuts. As the giant shark finally slows down, gasping for oxygenated water as its life slips away, the pack moves in for the final, gruesome harvest. The megalodon does not die in a blaze of glory. It is slowly, painfully consumed alive in the dark, screaming a silent, unheard scream as the swarm tears its kingdom apart piece by bloody piece. Let us put all the pieces together into one final, terrifying simulation. Picture a massive 50-foot megalodon forced down into the abyssal zone to chase prey as the surface oceans begin to freeze. The water is bone-chilling. The physical pressure is immense, and the light is completely gone. The giant shark drifts aimlessly, its cold, black eyes staring into an impenetrable, suffocating void. Then, the heavy silence is broken. A rhythmic, piercing click echoes through the dark. Then another, and another. The shark twitches, its lateral line suddenly overwhelmed by the intense acoustic pressure. It cannot see them, but a pod of 4 fully grown Livyatan has formed a massive invisible ring around it. The giant whales do not rush. They orchestrate a slow, methodical symphony of terror. They synchronize their spermaceti organs and unleash a coordinated, concussive blast of echolocation that physically rocks the giant shark, stunning its primitive nervous system. Absolute panic sets in. The megalodon thrashes violently, opening its massive jaws in a desperate, blind display of dominance. But dominance means absolutely nothing when you are fighting ghosts. From the blackness above, a colossal bone-plated skull descends like a falling anvil. 14-inch teeth shatter the shark's upper spine with a deafening whir, sickening crunch that reverberates through the deep. Before the megalodon can even attempt to retaliate, a second whale strikes from below, plunging its massive tusks into the shark's underbelly, tearing a massive chunk of flesh and cartilage away in one brutal motion. Thick blood floods the icy water, but the shark cannot fight back. It is trapped in a pitch-black nightmare it cannot even comprehend, being systematically dismantled by creatures that own the dark. The undisputed king of the ocean is quickly reduced to a sinking, broken carcass, just another meal for the true gods of the abyss. The ultimate truth of the prehistoric ocean is a bitter pill to swallow. The megalodon did not just slowly fade away, simply because the waters grew cold. It was violently pushed off its bloody throne. It was outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and actively hunted by warm-blooded, highly intelligent mammals that treated the absolute darkness not as a handicap, but as a devastating weapon. Evolution is a ruthless, unforgiving judge, and in the end, it decided that a complex mammalian brain, the power of echolocation, and the bonds of a hunting pack were vastly superior to a giant, mindless fish with a big set of teeth. The reign of the giant shark was over. permanently replaced by the terrifying era of the killer whales. If you want to survive the deepest, darkest secrets of the prehistoric animal kingdom, you must stay vigilant. Hit that subscribe button right now and never, ever go back into the water alone. The ocean is full of ancient monsters, and we have only just begun to scratch the surface.